Oop, oop, Graham.
Oop, oop, Ray Watt.
Welcome, Science Monkey viewers slash listeners. This is our second ever video episode of Science Monkey.
I'm not used to having viewers.
We're not. I mean,
No.
still might not be.
Or viewer, maybe.
My mother might watch this. Well, Graham, where are you right now, Graham?
I'm in my backyard. So
In
this
what
is
city?
not a virtual background. This is an actual nature
What city are you in?
in Toronto. And I'm a professor at the University of Toronto. But
Very good.
I research classical Chinese literature, which is not really relevant to COVID, but I'll represent the person who doesn't have a background in epidemiology.
All things Chinese are relevant to COVID, don't you know, Graham?
I suppose so.
And you probably have special insights that we all lack.
And where are you, Ray
I'm
Watt?
on the bridge of the Enterprise D.
Mhm.
And right now the Enterprise D is parked in my home in Ottawa, where I rent a house by the bus station. And I say it that way to piss off my spouse, who thinks it's a very ghetto thing to say, but it's true. We rent a house by the bus station.
Mhm.
And I'm a professor in health sciences at the University of Ottawa. And today is our second ever all COVID episode.
Right.
So what you been doing, Graham?
Staying away from people, unless I know them well. Actually, I should say we've had a few friends over, but I'm glad for the warm weather because they come straight through, they go to the backyard, and we stay like 2 meters apart. So that's one way of socializing. We only have about 2 people over at a time. So that's as far as we've gotten in terms of getting back to normal.
That's great. You know, that's the way to do it. We're talking before we started recording that there have been almost no cases, well, almost no, much fewer cases when people stay outdoors. And that's because of a number of factors, as you know. It's easier to distance when you're outside.
Yeah.
There's more humidity, and with increased humidity, the droplets travel less further because they're weighted down by the air, by the
You
water.
said humidity like it was a big word I wouldn't understand. Humidity.
Humidity.
So is this, just don't say moist. A lot of our viewers, that word. I just said it. Is this one of the reasons behind the second wave that often comes in the fall and winter is people are moving back indoors?
That's exactly right. Like one of the reasons we think that the common cold goes away in summer for the most part and comes back in the fall and winter is people go inside,
Right.
also drier. So people are spending more time closer together and the droplets can travel a lot.
Right.
So outdoor activities are great. And this 2 meter thing, I've been asked so often by so many media in the last couple of days, mostly because, as you probably heard, the Prime Minister.
Yes. Why are you so good looking, Dr. Determinants?
Yeah, that is a tough one.
Actually, they don't say doctor, but anyway.
No, because apparently only MDs are doctors
Right.
by North American media.
That's been established. No matter how good looking you are. Sorry, I derailed. You were going to make a point about
being good looking.
2 meters.
Well, it's hard being good looking. People just don't take it seriously.
From 2 meters away, you're all right, actually. Close up is where.
If you're 2 meters away from the camera, you're 4 meters away visually.
Yes, there you go.
Anyway, I was going to say, you probably heard the Prime Minister of UK, Boris Johnson, contemplating reducing their 2 meter rule to 1 meter. And so I've been asked a lot about that this past week. Do you have any feelings about that topic?
Well, I understood that 2 meters was probably giving you a buffer. It was more than you needed. And I think you need to give people the buffer because they're not going to be 2 meters apart anyway. So if you give them 1 meter, they're going to be 50 centimeters apart instead. So I'd rather tell people more.
It's so interesting that your perspective on this, which is not wrong, is all about controlling people.
Yes.
The psychology, which is something that we don't think enough about in epidemiology. We think about the numbers and the data, not about how people will receive it and respond to it. But a lot of this data comes from studies on influenza going back decades about the distance that the droplets are likely to travel. And they found between 1 and 2 meters is when the droplets fall to the floor. And so after that, it doesn't matter how far you are. With every additional meter, your risk goes down by 50%.
Right.
So some countries that have the 1 meter rule, some have 1.5 meters, some have 1.8 meters, some have 2 meters. The US has 6 feet.
Right.
Yeah. And that's what, 1.8 meters?
Yeah.
The science is fudgy, except to say that further is better. And if
Also,
you can't
though,
go
you
further,
factor in duration, right? So if I'm walking by someone in two opposite directions on the street, if I get within less than 2 meters, but we're just passing by each other, that's very little duration of contact there.
I always say that I'm more comfortable walking by someone a foot away than I am having a conversation with someone 2 meters away.
2 meters, yeah, exactly. Even when we're in our backyard and we have people over, when we start speaking in an animated way, I start getting a little bit uncomfortable because I know the louder I speak, the more moisture I'm emitting. And
you know those close talkers?
Yes. Yeah.
Like, this must be killing them. Like, what are they doing?
The close talkers and the sprayers.
Yeah. It's gonna be someone's thesis of the year. What happened to the close talkers?
So the 2 meters. Okay, so I don't understand why Boris Johnson thinks that.
It's because if you open up more businesses, like
there you go. Okay, so you can cram more people into.
Right. And elevators, obviously, you can't stay 2 meters apart in an elevator. Right. So because people are going to be crammed in, what is a workable distance, scientific and yet manageable? So in some ways, I guess your approach is correct. It's managing the message and getting people psychologically.
In our building, the management put up a sign that said 2 people 2 meters apart in the elevator, and someone just crossed it out, put 1 person in the elevator. And that's kind of what I've been doing. Is if the elevator opens up and there's someone, just one other person on it, if I'm wearing a mask and they're wearing a mask, I just ask them, is it okay? Are you comfortable with me coming into the elevator? And don't be afraid to say no. You usually say that's fine. But,
yeah, you're going to get those assholes, though, who insist this is not a thing and intentionally want to expose people to their nonsense.
Yeah.
They're probably not as prevalent as we think, but they're out there.
Well, we have one in our building, I know, because every once in a while, Appy and I go out and do the banging the pots thing at 7:30, and he has a megaphone and he screams the fear is worse than the virus and stuff like that. And so we just bang louder. And then Appy got so frustrated at him that she broke one of our pasta strainers and like these went flying everywhere.
For people listening to this 5 years from now, explain to them why you're banging on pots at 7:30.
I'm not sure who started it or where it started, but it was to show support for, originally it was to show support for the medical frontline workers, but then it sort of extended to anyone that is an essential worker. For everyone else that's just sitting at home, doesn't have to go to work. It was admittedly a token gesture, but it was a gesture just to saying we're aware of you every day and we're grateful for you for what you're doing every day. The danger of it, of course, is a lot of people think that they can just bang a pot and that they've done their job of taking care of COVID. And so
it's Twitter activism without the Twitter.
Yeah.
It's something though. It's something. And
yeah.
I always think about the bus drivers. They're my heroes, even though will never take a bus ever again.
I know it's bizarre. I see the bus going by and there are 1 or 2 people on it. I take it because I know there are only going to be 1 or 2 people on it. So, but anyway. We have questions.
Oh, yes. And so many questions and so few answers. So let's, why don't you start asking me a question and see if we have any answers.
All right. This one, I believe, is from Mary. We'll just use first names on our podcast here. Is it a podcast still when it's video?
Sure. What does pod stand for? It's supposed to be product on demand.
No, it's the Apple iPod. But
it is, but they've rebranded
did they? Okay.
Because they think we're stupid.
Well, those could play video as well. So anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent. This question relates to something we were just talking about in terms of the second wave. And of course, I have a question about if you never get out of the first wave, like most of the US is in, when is the second wave?
Waves.
Pay attention. Did you take your Ritalin? Okay, here we go. What are the individual factors at play that could result in a second wave of cases in the fall? Okay,
let's talk about second waves and waves in general.
Yeah.
Why do these things happen in waves in the first place?
Good question.
So I was talking to a journalist about this earlier this week, and the analogy—
You talked to journalists? I never would have known.
Shut up.
What did they say? What did you say?
For people watching this 5 years from now, in the past month, I've done over 200 media interviews. 200. These bags under my eyes. It's crazy. And I keep track of them. That's why I know it's like 212.
Yeah.
Okay. So I related it to the predator and prey model that you see in an ecosystem. So as if you think of wolves and rabbits in an ecosystem, you have a bunch of rabbits, you got a bunch of wolves. As the wolves chase and eat the rabbits, the wolf population increases. As the wolf population increases, the rabbit population decreases.
Right.
As the rabbit population decreases, the wolf population decreases, and so on. It goes in a cycle.
Right.
So viruses and people work in a similar fashion. As this virus manifested, it's charging through the population. It's increasing. It's the wolf. People get wise to it and they start doing the things to prevent infection, and they rush inside the distance, and so the virus diminishes. Now as people sort of feel brave again and enter into the world, well, the wolf manifests again and increases, and this keeps on going up and down.
But that's just one factor, right?
Well, it's all about susceptibility.
Does that drive the whole wave thing? Because aren't there environmental things too?
Yes, and so it's about susceptibility and what makes people susceptible. So right now we think in Canada, fewer than 5% of the population has been infected, which means about 95% are still susceptible. And so long as people are susceptible, there's still rabbits for the wolf to eat. What makes you susceptible is, not having the antibodies, but also being exposed to infected people. So as we enter the economy, we are socializing more and becoming more susceptible, and therefore greater likelihood to be infected. Now, the environmental factors like being outside and wearing a mask, this will mitigate that.
Right.
So the rate at which the wolf rises into the peak, towards the peak, will be slower and possibly even not even noticeable. So I'm fond of saying that if we do all the right public health things, if we don't have large indoor gatherings, if we wear masks all the time, and if we wash our hands and don't meet with strangers too often. Sorry, single people.
Unless you're outside.
Unless you're outside, yeah. Full body condoms. Sex with a respirator.
just with the respirator.
There's got to be a new Pornhub category. We should look into it later. If we do all these things, then I believe that what will be subsequent waves will be little small bumps.
Right.
That may not even be noticeable. So is a second wave inevitable? Yes, in the sense that because everybody is so susceptible and the virus still exists, then it should manifest again. But no, in the sense that if we follow the public health requirements, it should not be noticeable.
So the reason we're not seeing waves in the US is because they're not following the public health requirements.
The US never lost its first wave. They should have been done their first wave by the end of June. That was all the predictions said that, with the assumption that people would follow the stay-at-home orders.
Right.
You've actually got another factor to consider, though, is
that they're very effective. These measures are highly effective then.
Yeah. Like, I was reading a paper written in 2007, earlier this week, about lessons that we learned from SARS-1. And there are 3 lessons. And this is fascinating. Lesson number 1, transparency is everything. We have not been transparent.
Right.
Data from China, data from Quebec, whatever. Number 2 is the 19th century technologies work better than 21st century technologies. What does that mean? Sure, the monoclonal antibodies and the convalescent serums, all that stuff is great, but wearing of masks and hiding at home, that's what works best.
Yeah.
Number 3 is going to be controversial, and that is that animal husbandry is not good for human health. So you take that up with the authors of this paper, but those 3 factors are relevant today more so than they were in 2007.
Yeah.
I do want to say something about the virus mutating.
Was that the third? You were on number 3, or
yeah. I was on something else there. We talked about the susceptibility of the population. We talked about doing the right thing via public health, but the virus might just go away.
Right.
Dangerous thing to say, but SARS-1 kind of just went away.
Yeah.
MERS kind of just
never
went
finished
away.
the vaccine, right? They never included the vaccine.
And even Spanish flu, after a couple of years, it kind of just went away. So that might happen. I'm not saying
a couple
it
years
will.
is a long time, though.
Yeah. Well, SARS went away in one season, and MERS went away in one season too.
Okay, so back to the factors that would contribute to a second wave. I think you said there was a third one.
I think that's it.
Okay, that's it. All right. I wanted to bring up, there is a China angle on this, actually, about masks being a 19th century technology. I'd have to look it up. I don't remember the details, but I remember roughly the first time that masks were used widely to combat an epidemic was a Manchurian epidemic. And it was killing tons and tons of people. And a Chinese doctor actually came up with the idea of wearing a mask, and all the Western doctors poo-pooed it. One of the French doctors said, "Oh, that's silly," and he marched into the ward and immediately contracted this terrible disease and died. And everyone else was like, "Oh, maybe the Chinese guy is onto something." And then they all started wearing masks, and it really cut down on.
It's funny you say that. You said "poo-poo." I thought that sounds like a French verb.
Yeah.
I poo-poo your mask.
But I'll find the link and we can put it up on the website, because it's quite interesting. And they have all these pictures of people wearing just cloth masks.
I mean, we have as you know, these movements in the U.S. that are so anti-mask, because mask is liberty.
Yeah. They have cards now saying, "I have a mask exemption," and they are claiming that they have some exemption under the American Disabilities Act, and they're threatening businesses with fines if they don't let them in with their mask. So.
That's a tough one, because it is possible to have a medical exemption for a mask if you have a breathing disorder or a panic disorder.
But you can't just print up a card by yourself.
But let's assume they're being genuine. Like, what do you do then? I would say that the public health needs of the many outweigh the disability needs of the few, sadly.
Get someone to shop for you. Anyway.
Oh, wow. Anyway, yeah.
That's another 19th century solution.
We get down the rabbit hole on masks for a long time. I mean, one thing I do want to say, though, is remember that my mask protects you and your mask protects me.
Right.
Somehow that message keeps getting lost.
Yeah.
Never about protecting yourself.
The mask on the person who's potentially infected, and maybe they're presymptomatic, is the most effective one, right? I mean, if they're shedding tons of virus and I have a mask on, maybe that gives me 5 minutes, 10 minutes extra. Who knows? But anyway. Oh, here's an interesting question from Allison. Can a dead body still be contagious? If so, for how long?
Okay, so here's how I look at this. Some people think about SARS-CoV-2 as a bloodborne disease that is transmitted through respiration.
Huh.
And if that's the case, then it should exist in the fluids of a dead body.
Right.
Thing is, how do you get it from the dead body then? Do you now ingest of the fluid of a dead body into your mucous membranes?
Okay, I didn't need that image, but anyway.
Because the dead body isn't going to breathe on you.
Right.
Now, you could touch it, I suppose, if it's leaking fluids, and then touch your face, and maybe in theory, get some virus onto you. I think that's possible. Never been demonstrated.
Right.
I would rank that in the realm of possibility, but very low probability.
The theory of getting virus in your fingers and touching your face, is it that would go through your mucous membranes around your eyes or something? Or how would it get into? Okay.
So let's go over
your lungs.
The ways in which a virus can be transmitted. Number one, via droplets. These things that come out of your lungs, embedded in fluids that go about a meter. Number two is aerosol.
Right.
So then the nuclei of the droplets float around in the air for a longer period of time and go further.
And we're just lucky that the coronavirus, this one, is not aerosol, right?
It is a little bit.
Okay.
It's a little bit, but most people think that that's not how most of the transmission works. So it might be. Number three is fecal-oral, which is exactly what it sounds like. And this disease might be fecal-oral oriented because it's incident upon the smooth muscle cells that have ACE2 receptors, including those in your intestines. In fact, they have found viral shedding in the feces of infected people. But don't touch people's shit and you're probably fine.
The human centipede's a bad idea right now.
Exactly. And, they get us concerned about public bathrooms, the aerosolization when you press the flushing and all that, but there's no evidence of anyone ever having caught it that way. Number four would be vector. So a mosquito biting you and then biting somebody else. Again, no evidence that that's possible. So I would not count that at all.
What about a zombie biting you who has COVID?
Think about that one.
Okay.
Yeah. Vampires and zombies. Or a vampire bit a zombie and vice versa.
Oh, can I ask you, or do you have other ones?
No, okay, five is a big one. It's fomite. Fomite transmission is when an infected person coughs on a doorknob and you touch the doorknob and then you touch your face. Called doorknob transmission. So that's the one that's probably most likely after droplet and aerosol. And we always are worried about that. Hence, recommendations that you wipe down your groceries and things like that. But honestly, I've never heard of a single confirmed case of someone doing it this way. So I think it's highly unlikely.
It's certainly not a bad idea to wash your hands. I mean, it's not going to only going to help things. I was a little bit concerned that the masks weren't really from the get-go I guess they didn't know enough, or maybe they were afraid that people were going to buy up all the masks, but really that should have been the number one message from the beginning.
Yes, and that's why we're getting some pushback on masks, because people are saying, early on you said don't wear it, now you're saying wear them. And I'm trying to write this blog post about this, and I keep getting sidetracked. But the problem was early on, the messaging was done from a clinical perspective, not a population health perspective. So from a clinical perspective, we know about masks from working in hospitals where doctors and nurses wear these tight N95 masks to protect themselves because they're in these highly infectious areas all the time, and peeling them off very carefully so you don't spread infection to other rooms. That's not what this is. It's not a clinical endeavor, it's a population health endeavor. So just having a scarf over your face prevents you from pushing your air a couple more centimeters. That, when scaled up to thousands of people, that's all it takes to reduce transmission.
It sounds like common sense now.
Yeah, it really does.
All right. Oh, the last thing about the aerosol. So why is measles so much more infectious? So like, how is it hanging in the air? What's the mechanism that it hangs around the air a lot more than something like SARS-CoV-2?
I have no idea. No idea how measles works. All right.
Because like another one of these viruses could come around and it could be like measles, where it's got like a R0 rate of 19 or something.
That's right. So I mean, one of the thing about SARS-2, what makes it so infectious is that it fits so well into the ACE2 receptor, more so than SARS-1 did. And I suspect measles has a similar interaction with its receptor, and also the infectious dose might be smaller. You need fewer incident organisms.
And I think more of it just hangs around the air for longer.
Could be. Yeah.
It's a lighter virus.
Nothing about measles, so I'm theorizing this point.
Okay. This is from Chandra. It's a longer one, so stay with me. Can you hear over your chewing?
Yeah, I'm gonna stop chewing now. It's probably annoying the listener.
Actually, I can't hear it. Okay, both Sweden and Japan avoided lockdowns, but Japan has been much more successful in limiting COVID deaths. There have been articles about Japan's cluster-based approach with limited testing. Can you explain what that is, and is that the main difference between Japan and Sweden? And if you can answer this, okay, let's stop there, and I'll go to his next question.
Okay, what's a cluster-based approach? I don't know offhand what that is. I'm going to theorize that the cluster-based approach to testing is you test batches rather than individuals. Right. And then you can identify that this batch over here is fine, but there's one case in that batch, so we're going to focus more deeply in that batch.
How are you testing a batch?
How? Testing a batch?
Yeah, if you're not testing them each individually, what are you doing?
You can take a bunch of swabs and combine them.
Oh.
Let's say you have a building of residents.
Right. And that makes it more efficient to do the testing?
Yeah, because you just do one test for the entire building.
Okay, and then you know someone in that building has it.
Yes, because most are going to be negative. But you find the one that's positive, and then you can investigate more deeply. I'm assuming that's what the cluster testing is, and I could be wrong. I have to investigate further. I should have read these questions first. So for the listener, I have not read these questions first, obviously.
That's quality control at work in science.
It's also showing off the fact that I'm rolling these things off the top of my head.
Because the other interpretation might be that they're testing a cluster of the population over here, and then they're going and testing them over here.
Yes, which is a fine way of doing it too. That's a fine stratagem for surveillance.
Which is also, I think, this testing the sewer water has been floated as an idea, because then you could figure out at least, okay, it's in this neighborhood.
Right, and that's part of the fecaloral transmission we talked about. So go on.
I was saying there are many other differences between Japan and Sweden, but we won't get into them now.
Kind of relevant for the question, because he's asking the second part is, why did Japan do better than Sweden?
Yeah.
A number of factors. I think it's a real problem to compare countries, especially in different continents, different cultures and different age demographics.
Yeah.
So the geographies are different, the cultural behavior is different, and the genetics is different.
Yeah, the weather is different.
The weather is different, right? And Japan's an island, that helps a lot. Yeah. No incident traveler cases. They could have been seeded at a different time period. What we're finding with this disease is the timing is everything.
Yeah.
So how early were they exposed? How early did lockdown measures take place? How late did opening up take place? All these things are just huge. That's why BC did so much better than Ontario. One of the many reasons is early and hard. Japan acted early, but with endeavors that weren't as extreme as the West or Western Europe, but were effective. And so many young people in Tokyo, for example, live alone. Who knew that?
Right.
I didn't.
Yeah.
So all
I knew that. They're not having kids either. That's why the population is aging out.
All that robot sex, that sweet, sweet robot sex.
Respirator sex. Okay. Chandra's has a second part to the question. And if you can answer this as well, is it possible and or desirable for Canada at this stage to follow Japan's strategy? But seeing as we don't know exactly what Japan's strategy is.
Look, I think Canada's doing well overall.
Yeah.
And with the exception of, Quebec and Ontario, which is pretty much all of Canada, of Montreal and Toronto in particular.
Right.
Canada's doing very, very well. So I don't think we have to follow anyone's guidelines, except to say that we can learn from other people's experiences with rapid response, testing, and contact tracing, and maybe use their technologies.
Has Ontario opened up testing to asymptomatic people or pre-symptomatic people?
I believe they have.
Yeah. Like if I walked into a clinic and asked for a test, I could get one.
You have to have a reason. So a suspicion of exposure is good enough.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
It's good to know. All right. Here's a question from Herman's Hermit, otherwise known as Adam. Do you think a second lockdown will have worse compliance than the first after we open up?
Yes.
Yeah, there we go. Next question.
Do you agree?
Oh, yeah. Obviously, people are already sick of the first lockdown. They're not going to be happy to go into the second one.
Something I've been telling journalists, because apparently I talk to journalists, is we have to do everything we can to avoid a second lockdown because the second one will not work.
Yeah.
So we had to pull all the plugs right now to make sure the public health infrastructure is put in place now.
Well, Adam's wondering if we see more illness and death, do you think it'll be easier to get people to comply the next time? This is like a psychology question. Right?
Yeah.
Or people will just be normalized that that's the cost of this disease is this amount of death.
If the Americans are an example to learn from, they seem okay with death and dying, as long as you get to go to the bars.
All right,
people, Graham. It's your people.
Half of me. Yeah. Chelsea asks, what is your opinion on the claims of false positives with COVID-19 testing? Can you speak to the sensitivity and specificity of the test?
Sure. So the swab tests that we're using most commonly have a high false negative rate. And that has to do a little bit with how the tests are conducted. Like they stick a thing in your nose and you swab back.
It doesn't go all the way to the back of your throat, through your nose?
Yeah.
That sounds uncomfortable.
Right. So unless it's done with some expertise.
Have you been tested, by the way?
I've not been tested.
Okay.
Not for this disease anyway. I've had other kinds of swabs, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. You're a veteran testee, I know that.
I got some testing stories. Anyway, later on. So there's the expertise that goes in with doing the swab contributes to the false negative and false positive rate. So early on, people with insufficient expertise weren't going deeply enough with the swab.
Right.
That was raising the false negative rate. It's still
because the patient was going, it hurts. Stop it.
So it still tends to be too high, and that's one of the reasons that we have these erroneous reports from South Korea about people being reinfected. Their testing failures having to do with false negatives.
Right. So they had them all along, but they got a false negative the first time.
Right. So the official
false negative in between. Sorry.
The official indicator for having recovered is 2 negative tests within 24 hours.
Right. Okay.
Right. And I need 2 of them because one of them might be false.
Right.
The assumption there, though, is that they are independent events. So let's say you've got a 50% chance of having a false negative. You do it twice, it comes down to 25%. Assuming these are independent events, but they're not independent because it's the same person being tested.
Yeah.
And possibly the same technician as well.
Right.
And so the false negative is a real thing. Now, when it comes to the serology test, the test for antibodies, most of those have a high false positive rate.
Okay.
And the funny thing here, or the unfortunate thing is, with the swab test, you want that false negative rate to be very low because it's a horrible thing to tell someone they're not infected and they actually
are.
With the serology test,
with the serology test,
exactly right. So you've got the worst of both worlds here.
Yeah.
So part of the challenge in the coming months is for the technology to be better refined to get those sensitivity and specificity numbers.
Right.
Enter.
And then Chelsea has another question. I've recently started to do outdoor play dates with friends and their children. We are 2 adults and 4 children 7 and under. The adults keep a distance, but the kids don't. They bump into each other and punch each other when playing games such as tag. Is this acceptable, or are we all going to die of COVID? These are the choices. It's acceptable, you're all going to die. Hopefully the answer is somewhere between those two.
Okay, so first let's be rational about this. The mortality rate, the age-specific mortality rate for children, my dog wants to get up here. Come here. No, ran away. The age-specific mortality for young people is extremely low. So your child is highly unlikely to die of it. Your child is also highly unlikely to get symptoms. But as we are learning, your child is very likely to spread it to others, including yourself. So they can get it from each other and give it to their families. So children are indeed a vector. Now, with the new bubble ideas in Ontario, if you're in a bubble with these other families and you have faith and trust in them not to be engaging in extra bubbler affairs, then you're probably okay.
If you're all in a bubble and you've all haven't been sick in 2 weeks, then you're all probably okay.
But, you know, we got some families with a teenager who's sneaking out at night to be with their friends in the schoolyard. And now your bubble has been compromised. Yeah. This is a huge...
The minute someone goes to visit another bubble, then your bubble is really now including everyone else in that other bubble.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. I mean, to answer the question directly, yeah, it's risky. It's risky having your kids play with other kids. It's risky for you and the other adults, more so than for the children themselves.
More so than the kids. Or if they're elderly people back at the house.
In the homestead, right.
The homestead. All right. Or maybe that was Sapna that asked that. Sorry, that last question was Sapna. About the children.
Chelsea, Sapna, same thing.
This next question, who is that sexy Rewat Dinandan guy, and is he a real doctor? No. I think that was from me.
I think it was from you.
That was from me. I thought that spelled your name Dio Hanando. I think that was right after your name was butchered on CTV or wherever it was.
Try to get my dog to jump in my lap. Come here.
Okay.
Come on. Good boy. Come on. You can. Oh, here he is. He's been not feeling that well of late, so we took him to the vet.
Do you give your dog's consent for him to appear on?
I'm his legal guardian, so I signed on his behalf.
Ah, you signed it. Okay. All right.
Yeah, so you can be part of the second half of this.
Everyone really wants to see Harry, but I'm sure you're not allowed.
Yes, my physician spouse who runs the household has. I'm not blaming her. I also do not want him on social media.
I understand. I just wanted to make that clear that that you had a rule about that. We didn't forget about it.
Right.
Okay.
He's in the captain's ready room.
There's a joke about number 1 and number 2, but anyway.
There are Klingons circling.
No. He's a baby.
The Klingons circling the big diaper. I don't know. Little diaper. Next question.
These don't line up very well with the question, so I'm not sure who's asking what, but I think this is Lisa, who's asking, if a place, such as a neighborhood, is identified as a hotspot, what can be done about that?
You call the Gestapo and have them, no. I mean, so much of this is getting very authoritarian. If a neighborhood is identified as a hotspot, I'm very worried about stigmatization.
Right.
You know, because so much of this is correlated with low socioeconomic status, with ethnicity, with working class behaviors, with large families, all this stuff. And so I worry that the long-term sociological damage done by labeling a place as being a hot zone will outweigh the short-term gains from avoiding that place.
Yeah.
So,
especially if you have a neighborhood that's full of essential workers who are having to go to work, and it turns into a hotspot. Like, who's to blame for that? I mean, it's not them.
You have these horror stories.
They're the ones forced to go to work.
Nurses and doctors being thrown out of their homes because their their neighbors don't want them around because they're carriers. These are things that actually happen because people suck.
Yeah, people suck.
But the answer, what can you be done about that? What we can do is deploy more public health resources into these neighborhoods discreetly. We have unmarked mobile testing vans. We can offer free testing, better contact tracing. We can offer income support to prevent people having to go to work. There are things we can do that are compassionate and with high impact that I hope the government is considering.
Yeah, I'm not the first to observe it, but it's a strange thing that many of the people that are paid the most in our society are now considered the least essential. And the people who are paid the least in our society are now considered most essential.
That includes us, Graham. It includes us.
That's why we're zooming here, not.
And I'm in space.
Okay. Do we know if people can infect others while pre-symptomatic / asymptomatic?
Yes,
I guess we should distinguish
100%.
those two things.
Now, yeah, the distinction is important because I guess these questions were submitted before the WHO had its bit kerfuffle, where they said that asymptomatic transmission is not a thing. What happened in that press conference was one of the scientists was asked a question off the cuff, and she spoke off the cuff without thinking too deeply about it. And she's also being very specific. Asymptomatic is not the same as pre-symptomatic.
Right.
Asymptomatic actually might not even exist.
Oh.
So asymptomatic is, of course, people with the disease who don't have any symptoms. It's likely that they have some symptoms, but they don't recognize them as symptoms.
I see. So clinically, people haven't been identified as completely asymptomatic and positive for the virus?
Right, because we don't know if they will develop symptoms later. I mean, I'm not aware of follow-up yet. Yes. I'm sure the studies exist, but I'm not aware of them. Pre-symptomatic is more common. So we think that you start becoming infectious about 3 days before symptoms arise.
Right. That's how viruses are very sneaky.
This one in particular. And it's a big problem because with SARS-1 and influenza, it was easy to detect the cases because as soon as you started sneezing, oh, he's got it. Let's just quarantine him, right?
Yeah.
This virus is very different. You start spreading it before you start sneezing.
Right.
And we think that up to 70 or 80%, according to some estimates, of transmission is caused by these pre-symptomatic.
It's pre-symptomatic, yeah, because you would hope that if people are symptomatic, they wouldn't go into a public space.
Well, I mean, they're assholes as well, but yeah, 100%. So the answer is yes, pre-symptomatic infection is definitely a big deal.
Some common colds work like that too, right? They spread before you're...
Yeah, but even then, you're not fully aware that you've got it. I mean, you probably are symptomatic.
Right.
Or you've got a slight fever, you don't know it yet.
Right.
Yeah.
So we should probably be paying attention to if we just feel off for some reason.
Even then, it's probably too late.
Right. Okay.
You know?
So you can feel 100% fine and be spreading it.
Yeah.
Okay. That's comforting.
It is. And also people just have just a very poor sense of their own bodies.
Right. And also a lot of people, a subset of people like to think they're sick all the time, but I think a lot of people like to think that they're not sick.
They're called men and women. Which is which, I'm not saying.
Well, the man flu. Anyway. Do temperature checks in public places actually provide any protection?
Good question.
This
Very
idea.
Good question.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's my position on this. And again, I did a media thing on this as well.
Right.
Is by the time you have a fever that is detectable, you have already been infectious, right? Second of all, you might be infectious and not have a fever.
Right.
Third, you might have a fever and have suppressed it with over-the-counter medications like
right.
Yeah. So overall, it doesn't offer a whole lot, in my opinion. However,
maybe a false sense of security.
A false sense or a good sense, depends how you look at it. It's one element that can be added, one layer of protection. Other things, like some grocery stores have temperature checks now, and my bigger concern is what happens if you test positive while in line to get into the grocery store?
Right.
You're not stigmatized as a van rolls up and takes you away. Like I go into the corner to be publicly shamed and identified as being Typhoid Mary. So the sociological implications become even more so when we have this public.
My local grocery store for a while was asking you whether you traveled in the last 14 days. And if you answered yes to any of their questions, they said, sorry, you can't come in.
Yeah. And
but that's not the same as taking a temperature and saying, you're sick.
It's kind of similar. I mean, I can see some people being very sensitive and not wanting to identify themselves as potentially carriers.
Right.
maybe the Uber driver won't want to take you home if the grocery store has rejected you.
Right.
You know, who knows? Ultimately, I don't like the temperature checks for that reason. Is unless there's a system in place to safely and respectfully take care of people who test positive, then I'm not in favor of it.
Now, it seems I've heard of a lot of COVID transmission happens in the home, right? Because people are living together.
Yeah.
And so one person gets it, and then everyone else in the home gets it. And so I believe, you might hear some banging in the background because it's 7:30. China's policy was when they identified someone who had it, they would go into a special center, and they weren't allowed to go back home until they were through their symptoms. Do you think that would be useful on a voluntary basis?
I don't think so. And by the way, I think it's really important that we have the 7:30 banging on the recording. This is great for posterity purposes. Now, again, for kids listening to this 5 years from now, that's what it sounds like. It's I feel like I'm joining in almost. Bang, 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 bang.
We're usually banging pots and pans is a lot louder. I think that's someone hitting their fence or something. I don't know.
Or a really big woodpecker is mutated.
So, do you think providing a voluntary, like, hotels aren't being used, right? So if we identified someone had it, we'd say you can go stay free in this hotel. Don't endanger your family.
Sure. Okay. I think it's useful for those people without the ability to quarantine at home.
Right.
I have concern for. Absolutely. The more resources and tools given to the public to take care of themselves and each other, I'm in favor of.
Can you quarantine effectively at home by just putting a person in one room and then no one else goes in that room?
Yeah, I think you can. I mean, I've seen some stats to show that an infected spouse only gives it to their spouse like 30% of the time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's possible, but you got to have a large enough home. And look, at my house, we have a plan. We had a plan, like if I get infected, I got to go live in the basement with the dog.
Right.
You know, there's a separate entrance there and a separate bathroom, and she would send down food in a bucket.
Like every night for you.
Right.
That ends in Y.
Exactly. So, but to answer your question, sociologically, I'm troubled by anything that is compulsory. Like if you're telling people, you got to go to the gulag now because you got the...
No, that's why I said voluntary. Oh, there's some more people.
Cool.
Now I'm feeling like a slacker talking to you instead of doing that.
Welcome to the life of my students.
Okay. Here's someone named Logan. I wonder who that is. Run, Logan, run. That's an old joke no one will get. If a family has autoimmune issues, although I don't know if this is lining up. I don't know if I'm getting the right names. I'm sorry if I'm not attributing these properly. Someone asked, if a family has autoimmune issues such as thyroid, connective tissue disorders, rheumatoid arthritis, etc., would those diagnosed or not yet diagnosed with issues all be at higher risk if they get COVID-19? They are otherwise healthy individuals. I'm sorry, I'm being interrupted by... This could be my sushi order. Are you able to pause the
yeah, let's pause. Recording? I'll pause the recording right now.
Okay.
Hey,
and we're back.
We're back.
We are back. And that was an opportune interruption. I ordered some takeout or delivery sushi. Tipped the guy 25%. I've tipped everyone 25% in these conditions. But
high roller.
How safe is it to order?
Very safe. It's very safe.
Yeah.
It's very safe. I mean, there's been no cases that I'm aware of anyone getting this disease from food or from services.
Yeah.
And people need your money. So.
And I always ask them to call me when they're outside. They don't have to come into the building. I go outside and.
Right. You get the disease from people, not from things.
Right. Yeah.
Stay away from people because people suck.
Yeah. Okay. So I feel better about that. So.
Good.
I was on to another question.
The rheumatoid arthritis.
Oh yeah, it was about autoimmune issues.
Okay, so autoimmune issues are not the same as immunocompromised issues. That's the first thing.
Okay.
So autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis or lupus, where your immune system attacks your own body. Can you hear a baby? Can you hear the baby in the background? There's a baby in engineering.
Captain Janeway was upset about something.
Number one.
I'm a doctor, not a nurse.
Damn it, Jim. I'm an epidemiologist, not a real doctor. Anyway, autoimmune diseases are not the same as immunocompromised state. So, however, many people with autoimmune diseases take drugs that compromise their immune systems.
That makes sense, because they're suppressing their immune system.
Precisely right. Which is ironic, because one might assume that if you have an overactive immune system that's attacking your own body, that might in turn offer some protection against an external invader like a virus. That's unclear if that's true or not, but that would be the theory. But if you're taking a drug that suppresses your immune system, then you are possibly at risk. Now, there is no data yet that I'm aware of that suggests that that people have a bad or worse reaction to this disease, except to the extent that it overlaps with other factors that make you susceptible. By which I mean, what data we do have suggests that those people that have worst COVID reactions, autoimmune diseases, are also those people who are also obese and diabetic, and all the stuff.
Actually, this person specifically ruled that out. They're otherwise healthy with no asthma, obesity, or hypertension.
Oh, okay. Well, in that case, the age remains the highest highest factor. Now, I will say, though, that some people with autoimmune diseases like lupus are on hydrochloroquine, the Trump drug. Now, I'm not going to mock that drug because it does show some efficacy in some studies, not overall. So it is possible that people on lupus with that drug may have a better response. My safe answer is there is no evidence yet to show that the autoimmune disease in and of itself makes you more susceptible to getting the disease and more susceptible to having a bad reaction to when you get the
What
disease.
about, I forget the term now, is it cytokine storm?
Yes, the cytokine storm. So the cytokine storm is when your immune response is so overwhelming, it kills you. So the mucus produced by your alveoli in your lungs is the pneumonia that drowns you. An
autoimmune disorders be more susceptible to having that kind of reaction?
Yeah, that would make sense to me. I'm not sure. That would make sense to me. Yeah.
All right.
I haven't got a good answer for you.
That's it for our official questions.
Yeah,
I have one more question I wanted to add on, which was about the larger kind of, and this is not your bailiwick because you're not a sociologist.
Apparently neither is autoimmune diseases.
Yeah.
Or measles.
Or you're not a politician either. But as an epidemiologist, I'm sure there's data that this COVID has struck poorer communities and communities of color more than wealthy white communities. Is there any data that can be gathered that could then be used to inform policy? Like, how would that inform policy? Your resource distribution, or where you concentrate your testing? Or
okay, that's a really important question, and many journalists have asked me that as well. So there's something
you've had 200 interviews. I'm sure you've been asked.
No one has asked me why I'm so good looking before, though.
Well, I did.
There's something we teach called the socio-demographic determinants of health. And
socio-determinants?
Yes, the social determinants of health. So why do people get sick? They get sick because their bodies are compromised in some fashion, or they're exposed to some pathogen or some other factor that gives them the disease. But why are they then exposed? Often it's because of their race, their sex, their age, their disability status, where they live, how wealthy they are, and so forth. So it's hard to disentangle those factors from health outcomes. It doesn't mean they are proximally causal. Like, you're not getting COVID because you're Black, you're getting COVID because you're poor and live in a neighborhood that doesn't allow you to socially distance and have a job that doesn't allow you to work from home, oftentimes because of long-term systemic social issues that arose because you're Black. So,
which what COVID has done is actually exposed a lot of these issues that people haven't been wanting to think about, but now
exactly So we haven't got a lot of this data in Canada yet, but in the US they're studying it with a passion, and we know that African Americans are several times more likely to get and die of this disease than Latinos, and Latinos are several times more likely to get and die of it than whites, and so forth. I've heard it described well this way: when we have chronic diseases are the result of behaviors, poor nutrition, poor exercise, being exposed to toxic environments. Those are slow-moving tragedies. They don't manifest for years or decades hence. The bad fried chicken you have today or the lack of vegetables you have this month won't kill you until you're 60 possibly.
Right.
With this disease though, it's allowed what would have been a chronic, slow-moving tragedy to manifest quickly in a period of weeks.
Right.
So what we're seeing is the obese, the diabetic, the generally unwell people with poor micronutrient status are dying very quickly.
People are living in food deserts, right?
Food deserts.
Yeah.
And they have jobs that do not allow them to physically distance. They have jobs that do not allow them to work from home. They have no health insurance. They're not in places where they can get tested. And they have not very good information sources either. So what do we do about this? That's the million-dollar question. And what we can do is, again, deploy public health resources more strategically and not just concentrate them in places where we know people don't need them as much, as is what we usually do. Like the best hospitals are in rich neighborhoods. That should not be the case. I mean, in a socialized medical system like Canada has, why do the best neighborhoods have the best hospitals? It makes no sense. Or the best schools, it makes no sense. So we need to have education campaigns. We need to have deployed income incentive and top-up programs to disincentivize people from going to work when they're sick. We need to have programs for employers of low-income people to allow them to physically distance at work. We need to have programs that allow them to get to work safely. Childcare programs that allow them to do all these things safely as well. Things that we should have done decades ago.
Right, yeah.
As I'm sure you understand, and many of the people listening to this understand already.
It's interesting how you put it, that what COVID has done is accelerated all these long-term chronic problems and made them all sort of come to the forefront at once. So maybe that's one, I don't want to say positive, but one result that could lead to positive outcomes if people could learn from.
If we don't lose sight of that.
Yeah.
But do you have faith that we will? I don't. Historically, when this gets resolved, all of these lessons will be lost. But it's up to us to make sure we don't.
Yeah, exactly. That depends on people making sure that people don't forget them. So.
Yeah.
Which you're doing in a small way right here. So we'll see.
Hey, Science Monkey, woohoo! Any Chinese words of wisdom from the?
No, I worked in my one about the Chinese doctor being the first one to use masks as a public health measure during a epidemic. That was the only one I had. So. Are
you going on sabbatical soon, Graham?
July 1st.
Right on.
Yes.
And I'm going on paternity leave July 1st. So you won't hear from us for a while, possibly. Unless we get bored, as we probably will. So that's it for this episode of Science Monkey.
It is.
Thank you so much for sending us the questions. As always, visit us at sciencemonkey.ca and follow us at ScienceMonkeyCA on Twitter.
Right.
And don't bother us otherwise.
Oop, Ray Watt.
Oop.
All right. See you later.